Hello and welcome again to TelecomTV. I'm talking with Diego Lopez, who is Head of Technology Exploration at the Global CTO Unit at Telefonica I&D. And we are at the OPNFV Summit in Berlin in Germany. And Diego, great to see you again. I see you keeping calm and blaming
the network continuously. It's what you have to do.
That's what you get. It's your fault. We know that.
Definitely.
Right. A few questions about OPNFV to begin with. The organisation will be 2 years old in September, and it's obviously a toddler. It's at the toddler stage, small and feisty. Yeah.
Well, in this quite fast world, it's almost a teenager, I would say. But
that could be even worse. Do you think, given the short time it has been going, that it has lived up to expectations? And how do you think it's evolving?
First of all, we have been, in Telefonica, we have been more observers rather than very strong participants. When OPNFV was started, we didn't have that many resources to be focusing so many things at the same time, and we decided to keep a low profile in OPNFV. Yeah. In that respect, but from an outside perspective, I would say that, the expectations in terms of producing consistent, well understood, tested, and self-coherent NFV platform implementation has gone there. There have been something that at the beginning we mostly as outside of the OPNFV community found us a little bit complicated or chaotic situation, that too many projects are starting at the same time. But I guess that things are taking shape, and certain, call it natural selection if you want, in which some projects are taking a very strong momentum and others are somehow stopping in a natural way, something that is happening, and the community is taking shape. I would say it's in a reasonably good shape.
Good, thank you. Another thing is that since OPNFV came into being, there's been a whole lot, a slew, as they say in America, of open source initiatives and bodies and organisations that have sprung up over the past 24 months or so. People are beginning to say there's too many of them. So first of all, which ones is Telefonica participating in, and do you think there are too many?
Well, actively and directly we're participating in the open source Mano OSM project. And that we are somehow leading. The chair of the technical steering committee of that project is my colleague Javier Ramon, and we are contributing as well actively to Open Daylight. We have some connection, for example, with OPNFV, and we have started here these days. We have been discussing precisely how to bring some of our initial results on machine learning to the community. And I would say, and we have made some contributions to OpenStack, though rather limited because of the nature itself of OpenStack that is complicated. It requires a lot of attention and a lot of pressure to be exerted. And as said before, we are not that many to do so, to make all that pressure. Whether there are too many or not, here there is a situation in which I feel that the sector, in particular the telco industry, not only the telco operators, the telco vendors that we are living very much without taking into account open source, at least in what relates with the telco product development. We all have seen that open source is an opportunity, is a new way, essentially it's a new way of making standards, and that there is a certain opportunity of achieving, I would say, two main goals. One is precisely defining those standards in a new way, faster, more practical, more implementation oriented. And the second is something that is important as well, that is the opportunity for operators mostly to steer the industry in the direction they want. That implies that makes very appealing that any operator of a reasonable size is trying to do that steering in their direct interest, and probably this is one of the reasons. The second reason could be simply that we had not been working in open source till 3 years ago, maybe or 4. And that implies that now we are learning. And we have trying to cover many different aspects that were not covered. Things would have been different if there will be a continuous involvement in the last 10 years, and we would have ended with the same number of projects. But alone the 10 years frame would not sound that much. Now it's it's true. There is a blooming of those projects, but I think that many of them are being fruitful, and this is the important thing.
Thanks, Diego. Now, let's talk about use cases and real experiences using open source to deploy NFV for telcos. Telefonica is involved in this. Tell us about what's been going on.
Well, we are running our NFV reference lab is based on open source. In fact, OSM was born there, and is an evolution of that. And what you do is precisely that. What we learn inside our lab is put on OSM, and the evolution of OSM comes back to the lab. This is on the one hand. All the pilots and initial commercial deployments that we have made in our operations are one way or another based on open source. And this is important, it's not open source run only by us, it's open source backed by one of our providers, but we all are aware that we are running open source, and even our Unica infrastructure, the orchestration of that infrastructure is based on open source as well. Again, backed by one of our providers, just precisely to guarantee two things. One is about performance, second is about that we have a reasonably good response when a failure or an event occurs. But we're using it.
Thank you. Let's talk about you and Telefonica from a service provider's, communication service provider's viewpoint for the next few questions, so we reach the end, in fact. We've heard from many places that service providers in general have been sceptical about open source and NFV and other technologies. Mm-hmm. Some have been very willing to embrace it. Do you think that service providers in general, I'm not talking about Telefonica, we can come to that in a second, are really ready for open source? And I don't just mean in terms of technically, but in terms of culture, in terms of management culture, in terms of organizational psychology and the way the business works.
Let me say one thing. Open source is not different to anything else. You buy a product, you get a product, with the only difference that you get part of the product is a piece of source code. So in many cases I would say that the industry has been consuming open source without knowing it, even consuming open source without asking for the sources. This is like when you go to to buy some fish, a big fish, and you order it without the bones and the head, etc. Normally they ask you whether you want the bones and the head, because whether you want to prepare some soup or some broth and you can decide. This is a little bit like that. With open source, we have been using, the industry in general have been using open source for quite a while. The problem is in many cases, nobody was asking for the bones.
Right.
Now, many people is realizing that asking for the bones is a wise way to go, and we are starting to ask for the bones and somehow to make the bones ourselves. And this is the new thing. But as consumers of open source, we have been around for quite a while. First thing. Second thing, for sure, is when you are thinking about using the results of open source projects for directly providing the service. I would say there is a strong reluctance there for going that way. People is a little bit uneasy about the idea that the code that they're going to run has been built by a collaborative process. There is no single point of liability when something wrong happens. But again, the world is complicated. Well, complicated or simple in that, because there is a business opportunity for any company willing to act as an integrator and taking the responsibility of solving the problems and deciding according to their own policies how to progress the issues. And this is the model that I would say is being followed by most of the operators.
I like the analogy of the fish. I shall use that, Diego. It's very good. Couple of final questions to you then. As a service provider, as a representative of major European service provider and elsewhere in the world, what do you want? What does Telefonica want from open source in general?
Well, what Telefonica wants, who knows? I mean, no. I mean, I can tell you that what is my view, which are the advantages that we. Yeah. First of all, is this idea precisely of being able of a better steering of the industry. It's about that when you have a vision. Talking with our providers always has been a little bit complicated because it's following with another analogy. That's so I feel today as like that talking in parables. Yes, I remember from time to time going shopping with my wife, yeah. And she having a very clear idea of what she likes. I want to remember we spent half a summer looking for a particular model of a bag that she had in her mind, and it was what she wanted. We went to many shops, many department stores, and she could not find the bag that she has in mind because the people making bags had not read her mind to produce that precise bag. This is a little bit like you are in the position of connecting with the guys making the bags and telling, hey, in 2 months I would like a bag like this. Don't tell me it is not there because you know now how I want the bag. And well, we can sit together and see that whether that bag can be built or not. And this is something very important. For us, it's very important, this situation in which we can sit together. Normally, the resources that we can bring on the table are very limited compared to what our providers can bring, but we can somehow steer the process. So we can get this some result. We can get the result that we want from them once we have proved that it's feasible. This is one thing. The second thing, and this is important as well, is that allows you to accomplish something that is very important in the software era, so to say, which is precisely differentiation. It's about that you have something, you have the knobs to differentiate your service and the way in which you manage your service and the way in which you are selling your services to your customers, precisely because you can access the internals of the software and make some changes, even by third parties, not necessarily the original provider, not necessarily yourself, because the source is open.
Well, that was absolutely fascinating. We've known each other for a long time now, and we've chatted a lot in the past. We've never spoken in parables before. Things are changing, Diego. Things are changing.
I'm becoming more and more elevated.
Absolutely great to see you, Diego Lopez. Thank you very much.
Thank you.